Brad! Watch out! Brad Weaver glanced up just in time to catch a popfly coming toward him. He raised his left hand and easily snatched it out of the air. 3 outs. Game over. He wasn't overly impressed with the kids from the north side. He and his buddies from Maple Street had won 8-2, even though he'd been daydreaming the whole time. Even with some 7th graders on the team. Most of the team was 6th graders, except for Craig Miller, a 7th grader who had been held back a year. Craig was always grinning, but he was a bit slow compared to the others, not stupid, just a little behind. Thought you were gonna miss that one, Weaver. Daniel Porter, probably Brad's best friend and the class clown, shouted. In your dreams, Porter. These guys couldn't touch us, even with you on our side. Brad shot back. Craig snickered. Daniel blushed, then did what any kid would do after getting zinged. He tackled Brad and started rubbing his head with his knuckles. Brad jabbed him in the ribs, causing Daniel to jump back like he'd been shocked. Ow! Daniel yelped, stumbling away. You jerk! Brad grinned, swinging an imaginary bat. 2 victories in one day for the Bradster. Brad! Daniel's teasing was interrupted by a shrill shout and the sight of a small girl rushing toward them. Brad winced. It was Angela Peters, the girl who had moved in next door this summer. Not that Angela, who was in 4th grade, was unpleasant, but it was embarrassing at this moment. Over the summer, while all his friends were away at camp, Brad had stayed home to work on his batting with a high schooler named Jimmy, whose mom was a friend of his. Jimmy was on track to be a star on the high school team, so Brad had jumped at the chance to train with him. But Brad had still had a lot of free time, and that's when Angela moved in. She'd brought him a bowl of brownies on the first day, and he couldn't be rude to her. They chatted over brownies and milk, and despite himself, Brad found her interesting for a girl. Her dark eyes were a little unsettling, but he couldn't quite explain why. The two spent the summer playing video games and hanging out, and Angela even convinced Brad to have a picnic/tea party. Since school started, though, Brad hadn't seen much of her, and he never mentioned her to his friends. He figured he'd be embarrassed if they knew he'd spent the whole summer hanging out with a girl. Brad, where have you been? I haven't seen you in weeks, Angela asked, out of breath from running over. Daniel shot Brad a playful look and smirked. Brad was caught off guard. Angela. I've been busy with school and stuff, how about you? Angela pouted slightly. Well, you seem to have time for your games. You should come over tomorrow. We can watch movies or play video games. Daniel snickered. Yeah, Brad, you two can play Barbie. Angela glared at him. We play PlayStation, for your information. Brad blushed. I don't think I can, Angela. I've already got plans. Angela's face fell. Okay, what about Sunday? Brad rubbed the back of his neck. I've got stuff to do then too. Angela looked hurt. Brad, is something wrong? You're acting weird. Brad winced, but Daniel chimed in, grinning. It's fine, Brad, go play Barbie. We'll let you off for one game. Angela shot Daniel a sharp look. Are you obsessed with Barbie? Do you collect them or something? For the second time that day, Daniel was left speechless. But this time, there was no tackle as Brad pulled Angela aside. Angela, look, I had fun this summer, but I've been friends with these guys for years. I can't just ditch them. Why can't you be friends with me too? We can be, but I can't hang out with you right now. They wouldn't get it. So, because they're your friends, you can't hang out with girls? Fine, Brad, I wish I'd known this sooner. Angela started walking away, tears brimming in her eyes. Brad watched her leave, suddenly feeling like a jerk. He turned back to his friends. Daniel grinned. You two gonna go play dress up now? Shut up, Daniel. Angela walked home in tears, a spark of determination appearing in her eyes as she glanced back. "We'll see about that, Brad. We'll see." Brad woke up to the sun shining directly on his face. He'd left the shades open again. He groggily rolled out of bed, rubbing his eyes. At least he wouldn't be late for practice at the sandlot today. As he began getting dressed, an odd sense of dread washed over him. He couldn't pinpoint why, but something felt off. He shrugged it off, finishing his morning routine and heading downstairs to pour a bowl of Rice Krispies and a glass of orange juice. After breakfast, he stepped outside and started jogging toward the sandlot. That's when he noticed Angela watching him from her front door. Guilt hit him instantly. He thought about going over to apologize, but instead, Angela just smiled, waved, and went back inside, laughing to herself. Brad felt unsettled, as if she knew something he didn't. He shook off the feeling and continued running toward the lot. Halfway there, he realized he'd forgotten his bat and glove. But strangely, he didn't really feel like practicing anymore. When he arrived, Daniel and Craig were already there. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's up with your face, man?" Brad shot him a look. "What's wrong with it?" Craig examined him for a second. "You look pale. Something freak you out?" Brad thought of Angela and the way she'd waved at him. Why did it feel so strange? "No," he said. "I just don't feel like practicing today." Daniel shrugged. "That's fine. Actually, we were gonna tell you we're taking the day off. We both already packed up our gear." Brad let out a sigh of relief. "So what do you guys want to do?" Craig suggested, "How about the mall?" "Sure," Daniel agreed. "I was thinking the same thing." Brad raised an eyebrow. "What are we even gonna do at the mall?" Daniel furrowed his brow. "We can play some video games, I guess." "Dude, you have a PlayStation 2 at home," Brad replied. "Yeah, well, I want to see if there are any new games at the arcade," Daniel snapped. All right, Brad said, throwing his hands up. "Let's go to the mall." At the mall, Daniel and Craig led the way, chatting excitedly, while Brad lagged behind, still feeling uneasy. After a while, he started to feel a little more relaxed and joined in the conversation until he almost bumped into Craig, who had stopped to stare into a store. Brad followed Craig's gaze and saw Sarah Little, a high school freshman, looking at some clothes in the store. Sarah was stunning, she looked older than her age, and even Brad could tell she was beautiful. Craig, who was 2 years older than Brad and Daniel, was clearly entranced. Brad nudged him. "Come on, Romeo. Video games, remember?" Craig snapped out of his trance, blushing, and marched ahead to the arcade. After spending a couple of hours in the arcade and spending more allowance than they planned, the trio decided to grab some food at the food court and wander around a bit. As they passed by a toy store, Brad suddenly had an urge to go in. "Hey guys, let's check out KB for a second." Daniel nodded. "I was thinking the same thing." Inside, the group split up. Brad wandered to the action figure aisle and spotted a Senator Amidala doll from the latest Star Wars movie. He had been collecting these figures, and he immediately began looking for a Yoda. His eyes fell on the doll, and for some reason, it reminded him of Angela, just older. As he looked closer, something about the doll's eye caught his attention. It sparkled at him, almost like a real eye. Startled, Brad stumbled backward, knocking over a rack of keychains. He quickly scrambled to pick them up and threw them back in their tray before hurrying toward the exit. Daniel came up behind him, confused. "Hey, man, wait up. What's going on? You almost knocked that stand over." Brad looked around. "Nothing, I just slipped." "Where's Craig?" The two spotted Craig talking to Sarah outside the express store. They seemed to be getting along really well, and Brad felt a pang of jealousy. He knew what would come next. Craig would start dating her and drift away from the group. The way they were talking, it felt like they'd known each other for years. Brad and Daniel approached, and Sarah gave Brad an odd look before excusing herself and walking off. Brad turned to Craig. "What was that all about? You two were talking like you were old friends." Craig shrugged. "We've known each other for a while. I can't believe I haven't mentioned her before." Brad's feelings of sadness deepened, realizing his friend was growing up and moving on. Then, he got a third shock of the day. Craig was wearing earrings. "What are those?" Brad practically shouted, his eyes widening. He could see they were small silver hoops in each ear. Craig looked sheepish. "Sarah talked me into it. I couldn't resist her." Brad felt completely confused now. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You all right, Brad? You look kind of pale. Maybe it's time to head out." Brad suppressed a shudder. For some reason, everything felt wrong. "Yeah," he said. "I think I just want to go home." The three friends walked home in silence, their conversation oddly absent. As they neared Craig's house, they said their goodbyes, agreeing to meet at the lot the next day. Craig headed up his walkway, and Brad did a double take. Could it be? Craig was wearing hip-hugger jeans with flared legs. Brad turned to Daniel for confirmation, but Daniel was already walking toward his house 3 doors down. Brad suppressed a shiver and quickly ran across the street to his own house. As he passed Angela's house, he noticed her sitting on the front steps. He quickened his pace, heading for the door. Before he could reach it, Angela looked up and locked eyes with him. Brad froze, yelped, and rushed inside, slamming the door behind him. He sank to the floor, heart pounding. If only she had said something. Instead, those dark, endless eyes haunted him. "Did you have fun with your friends, Brad?" Brad rolled over in bed, the sunlight greeting him far too early. He stretched briefly before swinging his feet to the floor and dragging himself to the bathroom. Staring into the mirror, he confirmed what he already knew: his eyes were red. The lack of sleep was no surprise, considering the restless night he'd had, plagued by a dream that lingered just out of reach. After a quick shower and breakfast, Brad stepped out the front door and walked down the street. His pace quickened as he passed Angela's house, and he made his way to his destination 2 blocks away. He was eager for some batting practice with Jimmy, his unofficial mentor. Jimmy, at 15, would have laughed at the idea of being called a mentor, but Brad's skills had definitely improved over the summer. He knocked on Jimmy's door, and Jimmy grinned when he opened it. "Couldn't wait to get started today, huh?" Jimmy asked. Brad grinned back. "I'm ready to knock a few out of the park." Jimmy scratched his chin, the gesture looking slightly forced for someone his age. "I think you need a park first, pal. But we've got to wrap this up by noon. I've got a date at 1. Brad made a face. "A date? Instead of baseball? What's this world coming to?" "Hey, it's not just any date. I promised Sarah Little I'd take her to the park. Even you have to admit she's a real hottie." Brad feigned reluctance. "I guess I can get over it today. Let's play some ball." After a solid practice session, Brad thanked Jimmy and headed home for lunch. With his stomach full and practice behind him, he felt better. Maybe he'd just been letting his imagination get the best of him lately. Refreshed, he bounded across the street to Daniel's house and knocked on the door. Daniel answered, looking as tired as Brad had felt that morning. Brad noticed the fatigue and asked, "Are you okay, Daniel?" "Yeah, just couldn't sleep well last night. Weird dreams." Brad stiffened. "Weird dreams? What kind of weird?" "I don't know. I can't remember them after I wake up." A chill ran down Brad's spine, but he shook it off. "Hey, how about we hit a movie? Get dressed, and we'll go grab Craig." Daniel agreed, and soon they were at Craig's door. Craig's mom directed them upstairs to his room, where they could already hear the sounds of the PlayStation. They entered to see Craig, engrossed in a road race game, slouched in his chair. Brad cleared his throat. "Craig, come on, we're going to a movie." "Okay, dude, I can go for one," Craig said, reaching out to turn the console off before standing up to get his shoes. Brad blinked several times, trying to process what he was seeing. Craig wasn't slouching, he was just shorter. Slimmer. His hair, usually messy and at ear length, was now almost to his shoulders. Brad gasped, quickly glancing at Daniel for some kind of explanation. Daniel, however, seemed unfazed, looking as if nothing was out of place. Craig walked past them to the bathroom. He had always been a bit taller than Brad, but now he was at least 2 inches shorter. Craig didn't seem to notice as he brushed his hair. "Okay, let's go." Brad stood frozen, his world feeling like it was starting to collapse. Just then, Daniel's voice broke through his fog. "Brad, are you okay?" Brad snapped out of his daze, nodded, and managed a terse, "I'm ready to go." The movie theater experience didn't get much better. For some odd reason, Craig insisted on seeing Sweet Home Alabama, a movie about a fashion designer returning home to find herself torn between her husband and her fiancé. Brad wasn't having it. He refused to watch it. After some back and forth, they settled on The Ring, a decision Brad quickly regretted. The movie's plot focused on a demonic spirit haunting the living, which sent a chill down Brad's spine. But the real shock came when Craig let out a high-pitched scream when the spirit appeared. As the lights came on, Brad hurried toward the exit, eager for some fresh air. Outside, he paused to catch his breath before Daniel and Craig caught up. Craig, still concerned, touched Brad's arm lightly. "Hey, you okay?" "I didn't think it was that scary." Brad took a quick breath and nodded. "Yeah, just need to get home. Mom wouldn't want me late for dinner." Craig smiled kindly. "Yeah, I've got homework too. I better head home." The three of them started the walk home, Craig a little ahead, with Brad lagging behind, Daniel glancing over at him with a puzzled look. Brad was sure Daniel hadn't noticed that Craig's shirt was now tighter and a soft blue, trimmed with satin, nor had he seen Craig's new flared mud jeans with leather lacing up the sides. As Craig reached his house, he waved and smiled. "Bye, boys. See you later." He walked inside, and Brad couldn't help but notice a subtle sway to his movements. Brad stared at the closed door before glancing at Daniel, who seemed oblivious. Well, Brad thought, maybe I can warn Daniel and we can figure this out together. "Hey Daniel, let's head to your place. There's something I need to tell you." "Sure, come on over." Once inside Daniel's room, Brad took a deep breath. "I'm not sure where to start, man." Daniel grinned. "Take your time. We've been best friends forever. Nothing can come between us." Brad felt a little comforted by this. At least Daniel would always be there. "Have you noticed anything off about Craig?" "Now that you mention it, something's not quite right, but I can't put my finger on it." Brad shook his head. "Oh, there's a lot going on with him." Daniel frowned. "Got it. Hold that thought. I need to use the bathroom." As Daniel left the room, Brad sat on the bed, feeling a bit better. Maybe things would work out after all. He noticed Daniel's toy store bag on the bed and opened it absent-mindedly while he thought about what to do next. His fingers froze when he saw what had spilled out, a Barbie doll, blonde hair and all, in a sparkly white dress. Brad nearly bolted out of the room as Daniel returned, almost knocking him over. He muttered about needing to get home and would see Daniel tomorrow, refusing to look at anything but the door until he was safely in his living room. But even then, he couldn't shake the voice that followed him, laughing. "Did you and your friends have fun, Brad?" Brad settled into his seat on the bus for their trip to Chesterfield to face their school's biggest rival. He adjusted his cap and leaned back, hoping to nap during the ride. As the bus started moving, he let himself drift into a light doze, planning to wake when they arrived. Just as he was almost asleep, a giggle jolted him awake. With a sense of dread building in his stomach, he slowly lifted his cap and looked up. A pair of sparkling green eyes stared back at him, set beneath long red hair and a freckled face. She wasn't alone, there were other girls in ball uniforms peeking over the seats at him, giggling too. Panic surged in Brad's chest. He was on the wrong bus. He stood up and asked, "Why are you girls on our bus?" The redhead furrowed her brow. "You're on our bus. I think you're lost, unless you want to play softball with us." "But I'm not sure you're on the team," she giggled again, and the other girls joined in. Brad's heart raced. He'd missed the biggest game of the year. Worse, he'd have to ride with the girls' softball team to their game and then back home, all while keeping quiet about it. His mind scrambled for a solution when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see a pretty girl with brown hair and green eyes in a cheerleader's outfit. She smiled warmly. "It's okay, Brad, you can sit with us at the game." Brad shot up in bed, his heart racing as he scanned the room. No cheerleaders or redheads in sight. It dawned on him that it had all been a dream, and he let out a deep breath, trying to calm his pounding chest. The clock read 5:15 a.m. He had barely slept for hours after tossing and turning all night, finally drifting off around 1 a.m. He couldn't take much more of this. His mother had been worried when he came home from Daniel's place, went straight to his room, and stayed there all night without dinner. Brad decided he'd confront Angela the next day, though the thought of it only made his stomach churn. Unable to sleep, he headed downstairs to watch TV and mentally prepare for the day. When the school bus pulled up, Angela stepped off the sidewalk with a look that made her appear sweet and innocent. Brad couldn't help but scoff. She was far from an angel, probably more of a troublemaker. He jogged up to her before she could reach the school doors. "Angela." She turned, a sly smile curling on her lips. "Brad, what are you doing here? Don't you have a game or more important people to hang out with?" Brad frowned, sensing her teasing. "Enough with the games, Angela. What did you do to my friends?" She flashed that infuriating smile. "What are you talking about? I haven't seen them." "You know exactly what I mean. They're changing. Acting differently. Maybe they're just growing up," she replied nonchalantly. "Stop it. I want you to change them back. Leave them alone." She brushed past him, heading toward the door just as the bell rang. "I don't know what you expect from me, Brad. Sometimes friends grow apart." With one last smirk, she vanished into the hallway, leaving Brad seething and unsettled. The day went on, uneventful, considering what was hanging over Brad's head. He barely saw Craig and Daniel during school, but he couldn't help noticing Craig dressed in tight khaki slacks and a stretchy polo shirt, looking strangely popular with the older girls. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed out of place, confused all day, as if he didn't belong. Neither of them met Brad at their usual spot after school. Feeling suddenly isolated, Brad began walking to Jimmy's house, hoping his mentor could offer some advice. After a short 10-minute walk, Brad reached Jimmy's house and knocked on the door. Jimmy's mother opened it, looking surprised. "Brad. It's a little early for lessons, isn't it?" Brad smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I guess it is." "Well, you're out of luck. Jimmy had to go to the porter's house after practice," she said. Brad frowned. "Okay, I'll just head over there then." "Thanks. Good luck with your math," she said as he turned to leave. On his way to Daniel's house, Brad spotted Sarah Little walking in his direction, and his heart sank. He really hoped she wasn't headed to see Jimmy. The recent mall incident had freaked him out, especially because it reminded him of what had happened to Craig. Thankfully, Sarah crossed the street and kept walking. Brad knocked on Daniel's door, feeling a bit like a salesman at this point. Jimmy answered with a vacant look in his eyes. Brad. Hi. Sorry, I can't work with you today, I'm kind of busy here. Brad tried to step inside. It's okay, Jimmy. I just wanted to talk. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw a small figure behind Jimmy. What's SHE doing here? Angela waved from the living room. I'm babysitting, Jimmy explained. Angela came over. Angela motioned for Brad to come in. Come on back, Brad. Daniel and I are playing. Brad glanced back at Jimmy, who shrugged, then sat down, picking up a magazine. Brad followed Angela down the hall into Daniel's room. Brad had expected to be shocked, but somehow, it didn't surprise him anymore. Daniel's room had been redecorated in white, with a dresser covered in hats, hair accessories, and random trinkets. A large dollhouse with Barbie dolls was set up on the floor. Sitting on his bed, covered with a Barbie comforter, was Daniel, looking more confused than ever. He was still holding the Barbie doll he had bought at the mall. Brad was relieved that Daniel hadn't changed completely, but he still felt unsettled. Something was definitely different. Angela smiled at Brad. Daniel asked me to come over and play with Barbies, she explained. He doesn't have many people to hang out with since he got held back a couple of grades. Brad shot her a confused look. What are you talking about, Angela? Angela feigned innocence. Well, it seems Daniel wasn't quite ready for the grade he was in. He's been moved back to the 3rd grade. Daniel nodded, confirming the statement. I was feeling really confused today, actually, it was a bit upsetting. Brad was stunned to hear Daniel speak so childishly, and he noticed how much younger Daniel appeared. He turned to Angela, frustrated. Stop it, Angela. Give me my friend back. Angela shrugged. Maybe if you had been a better friend to him, you'd still have him around. I didn't see you coming over to play Barbies with Daniel. Brad sighed. That's because he plays baseball, not Barbies. Boys play sports, not dolls. Angela gestured toward Daniel. Oh, really, Brad? Are you so sure about that? Brad nearly fell over when he looked at Daniel. His hair was now shoulder length and blonde, making him look surprisingly cute and decidedly feminine. Daniel didn't seem to notice, continuing to play with a Barbie doll. Brad gasped. Change him back. Now. Angela glanced at the girl on the bed, considering. I don't think we can call her Daniel anymore. She's too cute for that. I'll call her Brittany, like my favorite singer. Don't you think she looks a bit like her? She'll be quite pretty when she grows up. Angela noticed Brad's horrified expression and smiled with satisfaction. Can't you see the resemblance, Brad? Let me help you with that. Brad watched in disbelief as Brittany's clothes began to change. Her t-shirt sleeves lengthened and the shirt transformed into a tied-up, button-down white top. Her jeans shrank into a cute plaid skirt, while her socks climbed to her knees. Her shoes became small, clunky, and adorable. Brittany now had the look of a schoolgirl, innocent yet charming. Angela moved behind Brittany, pulling her hair into pigtails. You and your friend don't have much in common anymore, Brad. The closest she'll ever get to a sports field is when she's cheering from the sidelines. Brad stood frozen, speechless. His thoughts were interrupted when Jimmy walked in. What's going on here? He asked, eyeing the scene. Brad looked over, desperately hoping for a sense of normalcy. Angela flashed a sweet smile. Just helping Brittany with her hair. You could help, too, Jimmy. Your hair is really pretty. Brad's eyes widened as Jimmy's hair began to lengthen, flowing down past his shoulders. The hair was silky and shiny, and Angela beamed with approval. Wow, your hair is gorgeous. It's just like a model's. Jimmy, oblivious, smiled. Thanks, Angela. I've always been told it's my best feature. Angela smirked at Brad, her enjoyment of his discomfort clear. But why are you wearing those clothes? They look way too big on you. Jimmy looked down at his oversized sweatshirt and wind pants, fidgeting uncomfortably. Yeah, you're right. I borrowed them from a teammate. They're a little too big. Jimmy slipped off his shoes, flipping his long hair out of the way, then began to pull off his wind pants, revealing slim, hairless legs and a small skirt in white, blue, and gold. Brad didn't fully connect the dots until Jimmy took off his sweatshirt, revealing a midriff top that matched the skirt. His waist was now much smaller than before, and his chest had taken on a more feminine shape. As Jimmy pulled the top over his head, his long red hair cascaded down, framing a beautiful face with plump lips and sparkling green eyes. Yeah, this is much better, Jimmy said in a high-pitched voice. Though I wish I hadn't left my other clothes in Kelly's gym bag. I had to make do with my uniform when she left early from practice. Brittany was watching Jimmy from the bed, clearly captivated. Angela noticed and teased, looks like you've got a fan, Jenna. Little Brittany can't take her eyes off you. Brittany blushed deeply. I want to be a cheerleader someday too. Do you think I can, Jenna? Jenna giggled, her voice light. Of course, you will, Brittany. You'll be an amazing cheerleader. At that point, Jenna seemed to remember Brad was there. Oh, Brad, sorry. Looks like I won't be able to help you with your math tonight. I'm staying here with Brittany until 9. Besides, Sarah and Kelly will be here soon for movie night. Angela shot Brad a mischievous look. I think Brad has to head out anyway, Jenna. He probably has some thinking to do tonight. Right, Brad? Brad, still in shock from what he had just witnessed, could only nod dumbly. He stumbled out of the room and toward the door, his stomach twisting in confusion. His mind barely registered opening the front door and stepping onto the porch. His attempt to escape into the familiar safety of the front porch was quickly interrupted. Walking toward him were 2 girls, one of whom was Sarah Little. The other girl wasn't immediately recognizable, but her resemblance to Craig was unmistakable. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that this was Craig, transformed. The girl before him was on her way to becoming a young woman, with silky brown hair down to her shoulder blades, a denim miniskirt, and a red sleeveless sweater that revealed a sliver of smooth belly. She smiled at him warmly. Hey, Brad, she said sweetly, were you getting a math lesson from Jenna? Brad snapped out of his shock, his mind racing. No, he stammered, I was here for. He couldn't find the right words. The sight of Craig now as Kelly left him speechless. His face turned bright red. Sarah giggled. I think Brad just came to see Jenna in her uniform. Do you have a crush on her, Brad? Both girls burst into laughter. Brad felt embarrassed and out of his depth. No. I mean. I really have to go. I'll see you later. He started to retreat. Sarah, grinning at the effect she and Kelly were having on him, waved. Okay, Brad. Be good. She grabbed Kelly's hand. Come on, Kelly. Jenna's waiting for us. Brad almost tripped as he processed the new reality. Kelly? Craig was now Kelly? His mind was racing as he trudged home, his stomach sinking with a profound sense of loss. That night, Brad's mind was clouded with despair. His parents noticed something was off, but didn't push him to open up. They respected his space, knowing he'd come to them when he was ready. Brad appreciated this and, though troubled, was able to find some comfort in knowing his family had his back. The thought helped him drift into a restless sleep. The next morning, Brad went through his routine in a haze, his mind heavy with the knowledge that he couldn't keep living in fear. He knew he had to find a way to fix things. He ate breakfast under his mother's watchful eye, his stomach in knots, before heading out the door toward school. A few hours later, Brad felt the weight of his loss more than ever. Daniel, now Brittany, was too young for middle school and nowhere to be found. And Craig was no longer even remotely the same, now fully transformed into Kelly, who was thriving in the 8th grade. Brad occasionally spotted her with the other cheerleaders, but it only served as a painful reminder of what he'd lost. The only familiar face was Angela's, often flashing him a smirk. Brad realized he would have to swallow his pride, find Angela, and try to put an end to the turmoil he was feeling. Brad found Angela at lunchtime and sat down across from her, no longer worried about what it looked like for an 11-year-old boy to be talking to a 9-year-old girl. Angela glanced up from her tray, wearing a knowing grin. "Brad, what are you doing here? Don't tell me you've outgrown hanging out with your friends?" Angela teased. "Or maybe you just couldn't make the cheerleading squad?" Brad flushed. "Angela, cut it out. I came to apologize. I was wrong to treat you that way. Just please, stop messing with my friends." Angela leaned in, lowering her voice. "Are you saying you want to be friends again?" "Yes, I do, if you'll leave them alone." "Maybe. But you've got to promise not to ditch me like that again. I really care about my friends. And why should I stop messing with them? Because I'm the one you're mad at. They didn't do anything to you. Well, Brittany did make fun of me. But I can forgive you, Brad. I'll fix it, but with one condition." Angela paused, then smiled mischievously. "Done." She pointed behind Brad. He turned to see Craig sitting at their usual lunch spot, looking confused as usual. Brad felt a rush of relief seeing his friend back to normal. Angela cleared her throat, snapping Brad out of his thoughts. "You'll find Jenna's a boy again. She's probably playing some silly high school game right now." Brad grinned, but then a thought hit him. "What about Daniel?" Angela giggled. "Brittany stays as she is, but I'm moving her to the 4th grade with me so I can keep an eye on her. She'll at least be a year older." "Angela, please. He's my best friend." Angela's eyes flashed. "No, I'm your best friend. That's the deal. If it doesn't work for you, I can always change the others back." Brad recoiled. "No." "I'll take it, Angela. I'll take it." "Good." At that moment, a blonde girl arrived at the table and sat next to Angela. Angela smiled at Brad and then addressed the girl. "Hey, Brittany. You're late for lunch." Brittany smiled back. "Sorry, Angela. I was watching the cheerleaders practice. I can't wait to try out for the squad in a couple of years. I thought we could walk to math class together." Just then, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Angela glanced at Brad. "See you after class, Brad." "We'll walk home then." Brittany waved. "Yeah, see you later." The girls stood up, giggling as they walked off. Brad sat there for a moment, processing everything that had just happened, before getting up to talk to Craig for a bit before class. After school, Angela was waiting for Brad as promised. They started walking home in silence, with Angela breaking it first. "If it helps, Brittany still thinks you're pretty cool, Brad. And she thinks it's awesome that my best friend is a boy. Actually, if I didn't know better, I'd think she might have a crush on you." Brad winced. "I still miss Daniel. We were friends for a long time." "I know, Brad. But we're best friends now, and we'll do everything together. You'll see. I just wish you would have changed him back." Angela spun around, irritated. "Brad, I'm done hearing about Daniel. She's Brittany now. If you mention it again, I might just change the other two back." Brad stopped in his tracks. "No, Angela, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say it again. I know exactly what you mean. Don't say it again. We're best friends, and that's how it's going to stay." If you don't like it, maybe Jenna and Kelly will come back. I liked them better anyway. Angela's eyes took on an intense gleam. And maybe you'll get two mommies instead. Brad panicked. No! Please, Angela, I promise I won't say it again. Just don't do that. Angela calmed slightly. Okay, Brad. But just remember, I can do it anytime. She glanced around, her attention settling on two boys tossing a football in a parking lot. They looked to be in early high school. Angela narrowed her eyes. For instance, one of the boys caught the ball and rubbed his forehead, while the other threw it back. In an instant, the boy's cargo shorts melded together, turning into a trendy skirt. His t-shirt shrank into a tight pink long-sleeve polo, matching his pink tennis shoes. As his clothes shifted, his body became shorter and thinner, developing curves. His brown hair grew longer, cascading past his shoulders and framing a soft, delicate face. The new girl gasped, fumbling to catch the football, which bounced off her chest. She rubbed her chest in confusion, while the other boy laughed. Sorry. Didn't mean to throw it that hard. The new girl stared at him in shock. Babe, she squeaked in a high-pitched voice. Brad turned to argue, but Angela raised her hand, silencing him. No, Brad, I did that to show you I mean business. Brad dropped his head, defeated, as Angela continued, one thing, though, everyone will know her for who she is. But she'll remember everything. Let's go. Brad glanced back at the new girl, who pressed her hand to her mouth, clearly startled by the beautiful voice that came out. As she looked at her body, Brad saw her collapse to the ground. His chest tightened as he watched Angela walk away. It hit him, Angela wasn't just a mischievous girl with some strange power. She was cruel. Heartless. She had just destroyed a life for no reason other than to make a point. Worse, she wanted him to be by her side constantly. Brad shivered, feeling his stomach twist into knots. How long would this last? How long before she started pushing him to do things he didn't want to? How long before she treated him like one of her other friends, forcing him into things like double dates, cheerleading, or sleepovers? How long before she decided to act on her threat for her own amusement? As Brad caught up with Angela, the sound of a vehicle revved nearby. Angela was turning the corner ahead. His heart raced as he made up his mind. He ran the final few feet to Angela and shoved her. Her eyes widened as she stumbled, arms flailing to keep her balance. She lurched into the street and collided with the bumper of an oncoming bus. Brad, lying on the ground where he had fallen after the push, felt hot tears stream down his face. He barely registered the crowd that had gathered, the ambulance arriving, or the sheet covering the small body in the street. A voice tried to comfort him, a hand on his shoulder, saying it wasn't his fault, that he had tried to grab her before she ran into the street. But somewhere deep inside, Brad knew the truth, witnesses wouldn't want to believe it. The hero's story would be easier to accept than the one of a boy who had killed her. The funeral was a large, somber affair. The town was shaken by the death of a child. Brad felt out of place, like an intruder. He spotted Angela's parents, their faces filled with sorrow, but Brad thought he saw a flicker of relief behind their grief. Then he saw Brittany, crying uncontrollably for the friend and classmate she had lost. Brad wanted to say something to comfort her, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't find the courage to approach her. When it was over, Brad left with Craig and Jimmy. His parents, worried about their son, tried to console him as they drove home. Brad's mind was far away, replaying the moments that had led him to this.